All right, as we continue our series here on how to edit a documentary using Edius, we are going to, in this lesson, take a look at how to edit using a three-point style in Edius. Let's fire up our program here. And you remember in our last session, we pieced together the first little section of our documentary about these two young girls living in a remote village right out in the jungle in Myanmar, Burma. So what we're going to do this time is actually just delete all of that material that we pieced together and redo it using a different style, a different editing approach. Okay, once again, let's check our settings. Let's over here make sure that we are in the overwrite mode and in the having the ripple mode turned off. You can also check these settings down here at the bottom. Whether you have the overwrite mode, you can toggle back and forth between the two using your insert key. And then the ripple mode, you can change that up here. We want to have the line going through. And we want to make sure that our video and audio are on, and that we're mapping the channels that we want our media clips to go to. Where in this style of method, we have to pay very close attention to where these are placed in order for the media to go to the right track. Now, since we are primarily working on just video track 1 and audio track 1, this might not be the best demonstration of the precision that you can attain using this three-point style method. But as we work through the tutorial, we'll maybe demonstrate a few options that are available by using your track mapping tools here. Okay, we remember that the first item that we want is a black mat. Now, in our last tutorial, we forgot some opening graphics too, so we'll maybe add those this time. But let's go find that black mat. It's in our graphics bin. And I'm going to use the method where we're just applying the graphic right directly from our bin window using the Shift-Enter keyboard shortcut. Let's stretch that right out. And this time, let's remember to put in our opening graphics. Here we have an opening graphic, the logo of the client, and we see that it has maybe a little bit more black at the beginning than what we need. So let's just go in a little bit and then hit our in point, and let's go right through it, put an out point. So what we've done here is we've placed an in and an out, and those are 2 points. In a three-point style method, rather than just do an in and an out and drag it down into place, we also add a third point. What we want to do is maybe position our cursor right about where we want our next clip to go, our graphics clip, and then we'll hit the in key over here on the record side. And we'll see that things change color here from the in point on. Down the timeline, it has taken on a little bit different highlighted color. Well, that tells us that we have placed an in point on the record side. And so now we have 3 points. We have 2 over here, and we have 1 over on the record side. But before we send this little graphic piece to that timeline, we need to be sure and tell Edius where we want to send it. We don't want to send it to track 1 because that would overwrite the mat that we have there. I suppose we could do that, but what we're going to do is actually put it on video track 2. So let's slide this little button up here and map video track 2 and tell Edius that's the track of video that we want to use as we send it. But now that we have told Edius the video track that we want to send it to, we've told Edius where we want to start it on that video track by adding our third point, now we can use one of these tools here. Overwrite to timeline or insert to timeline. There will be times when we want to use the insert to timeline, but in most cases it'll work out better if you use the overwrite to timeline. So just click on that little button, and we've now sent our graphic to video track 2. And as we play that out, we see that that's probably up long enough, and what we want to do is fade it out to black. What we could do is add another piece of color matte right at this point, or we could use our mix tool to add that down. Maybe I'll show you both ways. Here we've got our playhead position right where we want to fade out our graphic, and so at this point we could put our focus up in our bin window. Let's point to our color mat and then use our Shift Enter key to apply that mat there. And now we can use our dissolve tool to place a little dissolve between our graphic and the black mat, and it dissolves out. But another method that a lot of people like to use, let's just undo that. Another method that is very popular is to just expand out the video track by hitting the little arrow there. You can spread it out if you like. We've probably got too much of our audio track showing here for this to really work well. But now that we have this expanded out, let's open up our timeline a little bit. We can turn our mix tool on, set a node, and then grab the very end node, and now our graphics will fade out using that method as well. And then we've got one more piece of graphics here, the actual title of the video. Let's use our 3-point method again. We'll just set an in point and take it out a ways, set an out point, and also set an in point over here to give us our 3 points. Make sure that our track, our proper track, is mapped, and then use the overwrite to timeline, and we've now added our title. Let's add a dissolve up. Okay, it looks like it does a little effect there. Let's drag this over a little bit so that effect happens right after the dissolve comes up. And we could probably be out there. So let's trim this back and dissolve off. That's probably too long before it starts to dissolve off. Let's pull that back a little bit and then trim this up again and drag our node back. Okay, so that gives us our logo and title, and now let's contract our timeline because we are going to want to now have just a second or two before we fade up to our first shot. So what we want to do is actually do an in point here and set an out point here and basically delete the area that we've selected. And one of the easiest ways that you can do that is with a keyboard shortcut using Alt-D. Okay, so we're ready for our first shot. Here's our clip here of the girls starting out from their house. And as you see, it's just a little overexposed there right at the start. But as they get rolling down the road just a little bit, we get a better exposure. And so we could pick it up right about there. Let's set our in point there. Use our I key to set our in point. And take it to about there, set an out point with our O key. So we have our first 2 points of our 3-point system. Now let's take our playhead and position that where we want our clip to start. And because we want to dissolve up from black, I think we're safe to go in a little bit. We could maybe even go in just a little bit more, set our in point with our I key, and there we have our 3rd point for our 3-point of edit. Before we actually send the clip to the timeline, let's check our maps over here. We see that video is still pointing to video track 2. Let's slide that down so that it is pointing now to video track 1. And our actual audio track 1 isn't showing up because of the way we've got our timeline are showing up here. But if we slide up this little scroller bar here, now we'll see audio track 1 and we see that it is indeed mapped. And we've got 2 channels, both channels of audio going to 1 track. And if this has been a problem for you, I should have pointed this out last time. I caught it when I was editing the tutorial and I added a little graphic note if you noticed. But by default, Edius is probably showing you the audio going to 2 different tracks, 2 separate tracks, so that the left channel of audio is going to track 1 and the right track of audio is going to the 2nd track. And that can be cumbersome and tedious in an edit, so when I'm putting on ambient audio that has been captured with a camera, if it's a stereo camera or you've had two mics going into the camera, what I usually like to do is send both channels of audio to the same track. And you can do that just by right-clicking on it and choosing this little button here. Okay, so now we are set. We've got our video track mapped to V1, our audio track mapped to A1, and we are ready now to send our clip, our first clip. And you see we have a little gap there, but that's no problem. Just to swing that across and fill the little gap with the black mat. And now using our keyboard shortcut, we can apply our dissolve, and we should be good. And again, the ambient audio is a little loud. Well, we hear by the music that that's where we want our next clip. So I'm going to position my playhead right there where the music changes, and we'll go after our next shot. Right here where the camera is following them into the jungle, let's set our in point there and take it out to about there. Notice we're not being that precise about how long this clip extends out. You'll notice the one here, we ended up making it longer than what we needed, but that's not a problem because as we set our third in point, we see that the clip is going to start right where we placed that third in point. So now we just overwrite to timeline, and that applies that clip. Even though it's longer than what we needed, that's not a problem. Audio's a little hot again. Drag that down. We remember that we changed our shot to the wide establishing shot of them picking the leaves. So let's do our in and out there and set our in point over here where we want to take that next shot. Now, it's interesting to note that you don't have to have your 2 points over here and 1 point over here. In this case, where we know that we want to change our next shot right where the narration starts talking and introducing the featured girl, we know that we can put an out point here, and in this case, we could have only 1 point here. Let's go over and clear out point. So now we see that we only have 1 point determined over here on our playhead, but we've got 2 points determined over here on the record side. We still have 3 points, but they're not necessarily 2 points over here and 1 point over here. We can have 1 point here and 2 points over here. And so let's see what happens now when we add our overwrite to timeline. We'll see that that clip pops right into place and ends right where we want it to end. And we know that our next clip, yes, this one here, the close-up of Pa Wah. So we've got an in and an out there with no real need to determine our out point here. We'll keep our 2 points over on the play side this time and just set an in point over on the record side and hit our add to timeline button.
Oh, wow.
And I think we started our next shot about there. Let's set our in point and go after our next shot, which I think was kind of this wide shot of the two girls here. And just take it out a little bit and set an out point and hit our add button.
Lives in a remote village in the state of Karen, located in the country of Myanmar.
Well, as we look at this, I believe that we did want to extend this out right to the end of the narration there of that one clip. I think we must have had this one extend out a little bit longer. Maybe right to the second point there of narration. There's a little break in the narration there, a little break in the narration there. So I think that's where we had the break in those two clips.
Pa Wah is 13 years old and lives in a remote village in the state of Karen, located in the country of Myanmar, also known as Burma.
Well, maybe we want to catch that just before she stands up. Let's move that over and see if we can just stretch this back and be fine.
Karen located
Yeah,
in
that's
the
going to
country
work
of
better, I think.
Myanmar.
Okay, so we know we want to change our shot there, and I believe it was this shot of the girls crossing the river. We've already got our in and out point set there from our last take on this, our last run on this. So we just need to set our third point over on the timeline, then hit the I key for setting an in point, and then add to timeline. You might be wondering, well, what's the difference between overwrite to timeline and insert to timeline? Well, let's try something here. We remember that we had this one clip here, the little clip of the interview of the girl. Let's undo this and try the overwrite or insert to timeline and keep an eye on that clip of the interview and see what happens. You notice that when we use the insert to timeline, that even though we are in the overwrite to timeline mode, using this button here seems to take precedent over whatever settings you have down here. And so even though we are in the overwrite mode down here, by using this button up here, we actually did insert this to timeline. And the difference is, I don't know if you saw it, but all of these clips further down the timeline were pushed down when we used that insert to timeline. And it's kind of messed up our whole timing. You know, now our music is no longer coming up at the right places, and it really has messed up the timeline. So be careful, at least be sure you know what you're doing when you use the insert to timeline button as opposed to the overwrite to timeline button. Let's undo that, and this time use our overwrite to timeline button, and this time nothing gets pushed down the line. All right, I think we go back to, this clip here. Set our in point. Something else we might point out here is that you can do a fit to fill using 4-point editing. Let's say you have a hole that needs filling here that is this long. So we've got an in and an out point. And over here, we've set our in point, and let's get an out point. Let's first just drag and drop it and see how that, okay, we see that our in and out is not enough to fill that area. But if we wanted to quickly do a fit to fill, we can set this up to be a 4-point edit. Let's maybe just drop this back a little bit so it's not quite so dramatic. Let's say we have this area here that needs to be filled by this clip, but this is the only good area that we have. We've marked our in and outs. Well, what Edius will do at this point, because we have 4 points, it will go ahead and fill that whole area using the points that we determined here, but we'll have changed the speed of that clip. And as we play it now, we see that it is a little bit of a slow motion. We could check how much of a slow motion by right-clicking on it and checking our time effect going to speed, and we see that it is down to 60% of normal time. So that's a fit to fill using a 4-point style of editing. Just a note of curiosity there. There might actually be times when you're on a very quick deadline that it needs to get out to broadcast very quickly. You might want to know about that fit to fill using a 4-point style. But for documentaries, we're more likely to do a more deliberate approach to a slow motion if we want that effect, and set our own percentages and work at it from a different angle. So let's add this to our timeline.
Her name.
Extend that out and go after our next shot, which I believe was this one here. Set our in point on the timeline and do our overwrite to timeline.
It is a name that suits her well.
Getting this shot, I was actually wading out into the river. I had gotten wet the day before while I was filming her doing some fishing in the stream, and I was determined I wasn't going to get wet this time. But then they just up and crossed the river to the other side and were picking their leaves over in the other side, and I knew I just had to go over and get that shot. So I waded out, and I thought I was going to be okay because it was a fairly shallow river. But when I got to this area here, I was up to my waist, and well, that's another story. Anyways, I got a nice up angle shot, so I think it was worth it. And once again, I do this add Well, you see how this works. It's a type of edit. Because we're just working with video track one and audio track one. It's probably the style is not as dramatic as it could have been if we were working with maybe 3 or 4 layers of video here, and we were wanting to be very precise as to what layer of video we wanted any particular clip to go to. We were moving our mapping tool up and down the tracks here and moving our audio to different places, popping our audio into a very specific point that we wanted to based on whatever clip we were working with. Well, you could see how on some of these very complex edits that require a number of layers of video and audio, where a method like this 3-point style of editing, where you're mapping specific tracks to receive the audio that you send to a very specific point on your video tracks and audio tracks, you can see how this 3-point style of editing could be very useful in certain situations. All right, just one more thing I want to point out before we close, and that is, now that you understand the concept of the 3-point edit system and putting 2 points over here and setting up your playhead to where you want to take the next clip and putting an in point mark there using your I key or using this little button here. Something I want to point out is that it's not actually necessary to put your third point to use this 3-point system. Let's clear that in point so that there's no third point defined. All you really actually need to do is position your playhead where you want to receive that next clip. It's not actually necessary to hit the I key or go over and set your in point here. Edius will understand that when you use this button, Overwrite to Timeline, that you're wanting to send it to where the playhead is positioned. So we're back to kind of a 2-point method of editing, but we're using this method of using the insert button to timeline and being very certain and precise as to which video track you want it to go to, which audio track you want the audio to go to, and then position your head where you want that clip to start. All right, well, that should give you a good idea of how 3-point editing works and how you can use that style of editing with Edius 7.